Have you ever stopped to think why, deep down, women seem to have more power over you than you have over them? It's not luck, it's not destiny, and certainly not pure love. It's calculation. It's psychology applied to real human nature. Machiavelli once said, "Politics guided by reality, not ideals, reveals that the game isn't about feelings, it's about domination. What you call romance is often just a reflection of a theater of power." The brutal thing is that, while you lose yourself trying to prove your worth, they understand that the end justifies the means. They use the fear of being replaced, the desire for validation, and their vanity as invisible weapons. Better to be feared than loved, and yet you insist on seeking unconditional love as if it were armor. That's precisely where you become vulnerable. Here you won't hear romantic advice or cute self-help phrases. Here you'll understand with Machiavelli's coldness why every man who surrenders his emotional power already starts out defeated. And most importantly, you'll discover how to turn this around without shouting, without desperate defenses, only with strategy, silence, and calculated distance. If you have the courage to continue, you'll realize that the power was never in them. It was always in you. The validation game. Ultimately, every power game begins silently, almost invisibly. The game of validation. It's on this board that many men stumble, believing that constantly proving their worth is a sign of strength, when in fact, it's a sign of weakness. Machiavelli already warned, politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that those who submit too much to the need for approval become its prisoner. When someone feels they need to be recognized at every step, they end up handing control of their own destiny into the hands of others. Validation works like an invisible leash. The more you seek it, the more fragile you become. Note: when a boss realizes that an employee needs the job too much, the power shifts and the salary never goes up. When a woman realizes that a man constantly seeks her approval, the game is already lost before it even begins. The end justifies the means, and here the end is simple. Maintaining power requires minimizing this dependence. What sustains a position is not a lack of applause, but the discipline of not needing it. Imagine a man who, in every conversation, desperately seeks praise, a sign that he's doing well. This pattern makes him predictable, manipulable, and inevitably disposable. True power emerges when he understands that external validation is merely a bonus, not the source of his own identity. Machiavelli suggested that it is better to be feared than loved, but in the game of validation, there is a nuance. Those who don't need to be loved, but still receive respect, have already achieved the rarest balance. Think of leaders who don't beg for applause, but attract recognition because they don't demand it. It's the same with relationships. The man who doesn't beg for affection, paradoxically, ends up being seen as more desirable. Avoiding being hated is prudence, but avoiding being dependent on approval is a survival strategy. The question is how to shield yourself from this game without becoming cold or arrogant. The key lies in the calculated use of inner strength. This means building a reputation through small daily victories, keeping your word, meeting deadlines, taking care of your body, investing in practical knowledge. Reading Machiavelli is useful, but so is reading Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, because both point to the same principle. Those who build self-confidence don't need to live on applause. Practical exercises? Spend a week without posting anything on social media and observe the discomfort. This silence shows how dependent you are on other people's gaze. Or enter a meeting and speak less than you'd like. Notice how the power of your words grows when they're not wasted. Virtue and fortune balance best when the basis is not the need for validation, but the ability to create value without needing to advertise it. And this game, of course, opens space for something even more decisive, understanding that reputation can become a bargaining chip. The validation game, most controversial version. A man's most common mistake isn't being weak, but appearing willing to kneel for a little attention. The validation game is a cruel trap. The more you seek it, the less value you have. Machiavelli once said that reality-driven politics shows what no one likes to admit. When you become dependent on approval, you become a slave to whoever gives it. The harsh truth is that most women test men not by words, but by their need for acceptance. Those who need constant validation convey insecurity, and insecurity is repellent. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is to cut off the desire for recognition once and for all. If you need to hear "you're amazing" with every move, you've already lost. Power isn't in convincing someone you deserve it. Power is in not caring whether they believe it or not. Want a brutal example? The guy who sends flowers every day, who responds within seconds, who gives in to everything, thinks he's winning love, but he's just digging his own emotional grave. Better to be feared than loved here means it's better to be respected than to be treated like a carpet. Validation, when excessive, doesn't inspire affection but pity, and pity is poison for any relationship. Avoiding being hated is a rule, but avoiding pathetic is an obligation. Machiavelli saw that true human nature is not guided by kindness, but by the calculation of strength. When you hand over your validation on a silver platter, you're confessing that you need it more than the other person needs you. And at that very moment, the balance disappears. Want to destroy this weakness? Stop believing that silence is indifference. The calculated use of force begins with abstaining from gratuitous compliments and having the courage to leave the other person guessing. Try not responding immediately, not explaining every detail, not seeking applause to be applauded. Virtue and fortune favor those who control their own ego. Try this. For a week, don't post anything on social media and see how uncomfortable you become. This will show how addicted you are to other people's gaze. Another example? In an argument, remain silent instead of justifying yourself. The other person's discomfort will be greater than yours. This is how validation changes hands, when you show you don't need it. And when you understand this, you'll realize there's a currency even more dangerous and more powerful than approval: reputation. Reputation as a currency. Machiavelli left no room for naivete. Reputation is more valuable than character. Harsh, yes. But consider reality. In a world where politics is guided by reality, not ideals, it matters little whether someone is good or just. What matters is what others believe them to be. This is why the appearance of virtue weighs more heavily than the virtue itself. You can be generous in secret, but if the world doesn't see it, it's useless in terms of power. However, those who display discipline, courage, or morality, even if flawed on the inside, can open doors. It's the banker who smiles in the newspaper and hides tax crimes, the politician who lectures on family and keeps secret lovers, the spiritual leader who preaches humility and collects luxury cars. The game is dirty, but you didn't design the board. Reputation works like currency because it buys trust before any proof. A woman may not know if a man is truly loyal, but if his reputation screams steadfastness, she trusts him. An investor may not understand a company's balance sheet, but if the brand name inspires credibility, he invests millions. Better to be feared than loved, but even better is to be respected before even introducing yourself. This is the power of reputation. It precedes, replaces, and often even surpasses the facts. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean being fake, but cultivating the image that protects you before the battle. Because, let's face it, those with a solid reputation can make mistakes and still be forgiven. Those without stumble once and are crucified. Want a practical example? Look at global brands like Apple or Tesla. Both have flaws, delays, and production errors, but their reputations are so strong that consumers not only forgive them, but also defend them. This is virtue applied to the market, transforming perception into a shield. On a personal level, think about how your digital reputation already speaks for you before you open your mouth. The calculated use of force today isn't just physical or political, it's symbolic. A well-groomed profile, a consistent posture, the discipline of not exposing weaknesses in public, all this builds an invisible armor. Of course, character matters for sleeping peacefully, but when negotiating power, reputation is worth more. And once you understand this principle, you begin to see another blind spot: vanity as the weakest point of those who rely too heavily on this currency. Vanity as a weak point. If reputation is currency, vanity is the crack through which that currency slips. Machiavelli already understood that decisions based on true human nature are not rational, but driven by the need to be seen, remembered, admired. Vanity is the most exploited loophole in power games, especially when the target believes they are immune. How many kings have fallen because they needed statues? How many generals have lost battles because they wanted to be remembered as heroes? The same happens in modern relationships. Those who obsess over likes, compliments, and likes are doomed to be manipulated. Politics guided by reality means accepting that no matter how intelligent one thinks oneself, there will always be a mirror in which one wishes to be beautiful. And it is in this mirror that the knife is stuck. Want something practical? Observe a woman obsessed with being told she's unique. If you feed this vanity in a calculated way, you'll have power. But if you fall into the trap of inflating it without measure, you'll be dismissed as just another flatterer. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is to use vanity as leverage, not a chain. Machiavelli would say, better to be feared than loved, but in the realm of vanity, better to be admired by a few than trivialized by many. A politician's fragility lies in the need for applause. A vain woman's fragility lies in the need to prove she's desired. When you see this, you realize that the calculated use of force lies not only in the sword, but in measured praise, in the attention given at the precise moment, in the silence that refuses to inflate another's ego. The cruelest example? Social media. There's never been such a fertile field for exploiting vanity. Influencers build empires on hearts and likes, but all it takes is one scandal and the whole castle crumbles. Loyal armies in the digital world aren't iron soldiers, but followers who believe in a carefully crafted image. However, even the greatest fall when they forget that vanity is volatile. The power here isn't in being the most visible, but in knowing when to appear and when to disappear. Constant adaptability. This is the antidote to the vanity that destroys. Because those who master their own image without being enslaved by it become unpredictable. And it is precisely in this unpredictability that the next danger arises, when emotion precedes reason. Emotion before reason. Machiavelli had already made it clear. Human decisions are not born of pure reason, but of the clash of emotions. Politics guided by reality shows that those who dominate this field need not brilliant arguments, but rather triggers that arouse fear, desire, guilt, or pride. The most common mistake is to believe that people choose rationally. In practice, most decide in seconds with their hearts and spend their lives justifying with their minds. Better to be feared than loved, because fear paralyzes before logic has time to intervene. Think of how many wars were fought not by cold calculations, but by personal offenses. Think of how many women made decisions on impulse and then, when confronted, used rehearsed words to cover up the obvious. Emotion came first. Want something concrete? Watch a couple arguing. The woman knows she's right, but if the man makes her feel emotionally insecure, the whole argument crumbles. Or think about political negotiations. A threatening sentence carries more weight than 20 pages of contracts. The calculated use of force involves precisely this point, provoking emotion before reason has a chance. Those who master this trigger create realities, not just debates. Avoiding being hated remains valid, but instilling fear, respect, or admiration is far more effective than relying on cold logic. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is simple. Hit the emotional nerve before offering any justification. A brutal example is found in advertising. Politicians don't sell projects, they sell fear of the enemy. Brands don't sell products, they sell belonging and status. Relationships don't survive on rational dialogue, but on the emotion that keeps the bond alive. Virtue and fortune belong to those who understand that there is no neutral ground between emotion and reason. One side will always prevail. And those who underestimate this imbalance lose. Therefore, the true strategist doesn't enter the field merely with arguments, but with phrases that inflame, gestures that silence, distances that destabilize. Those who control emotion before reason will always be one step ahead, and this step reveals another, even deeper fear, the fear of being replaced. The fear of being replaced. Few admit it, but the true terror of anyone who holds power in a relationship is not losing love, but being replaced. Machiavelli already pointed out that reality-driven politics shows that no one is irreplaceable, no matter how much they try to believe otherwise. The end justifies the means, and so many play dirty just to maintain the illusion of exclusivity. Women, in particular, know this silent fear well. They can tolerate arguments, face crises, even live with flaws. But the mere shadow of a potential replacement corrodes like poison. Better to be feared than loved means, in this context, that the fear of being replaced generates more control than the promise of eternal love. Those who don't realize this end up living as hostages. See, in practice, a man who demonstrates he has no options other than a woman places himself in the most fragile position possible. However, one who makes it clear, without needing to say so, that he has alternatives directly touches the most vulnerable point of female vanity. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean constantly pleasing others. It means maintaining the strategic tension that you are desired in other ways. This is why politicians nurture false successes, companies create artificial competition, and leaders keep rivals at bay. Loyal armies of their own don't just mean soldiers on the battlefield, but real alternatives in life. A woman who believes she is irreplaceable governs. When she realizes she isn't, she becomes cautious. A straightforward example. How many relationships fall apart not because of actual betrayal, but because of suspicion of substitution? The paranoia of losing ground is more devastating than the act itself. Virtue and fortune in this game belong to those who master the art of insinuating possibilities without needing to provide proof. This isn't a lie, it's a strategy based on real human nature. The fear of being replaced triggers irrational behavior, jealousy, manipulation, constant surveillance, and those who provoke this in a calculated way control the board without having to move many pieces. But here lies an interesting paradox. While some crumble in the face of insecurity, others know how to use silence as the sharpest weapon to amplify this fear. The use of silence as a weapon. Silence is the most underrated weapon in any power play. Machiavelli once said that decisions based on real human nature are not supported by logic, but by reading reactions, and nothing generates more discomfort than emptiness. When you respond quickly, over-explain, or give too many details, You're confessing weakness. Politics guided by reality means understanding that in many cases, speaking is letting your guard down. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is simple: silence. Better to be feared than loved also applies to silence, because those who don't respond generate fear, doubt, and speculation. And there is no stronger chain than the one built by the other's own imagination. Want a brutal example? A woman accuses, provokes, or tries to manipulate with sharp words. The average man rushes to justify himself, to prove his innocence, to restore his image. And it is in this reflex that he betrays himself. But he who remains silent forces the other party to face their own echo. Avoiding hatred doesn't mean defending yourself against every accusation, but rather enduring the pressure of silence. The calculated use of force here is to not offer obvious resistance, but to let the adversary wear himself down. Think of interrogations. Those who talk too much incriminate themselves. Those who know how to remain silent disarm the enemy. This is the invisible power that needs no sword. Practical examples: in an argument, instead of reacting immediately, keep your gaze steady and your body silent. In negotiations, take uncomfortable pauses after listening to a proposal. Silence pushes the other person to reveal more than they'd like. Even on social media, not responding to criticism immediately can turn an attack into a boomerang. Virtue and fortune favor those who understand that often the absence of words is worth more than any speech. Constant adaptability means knowing when to speak, but above all, when not to. Silence prolongs doubt, multiplies insecurity, and strengthens your position. And this is precisely where the next art arises: not giving in, even when the pressure becomes unbearable. The art of not giving up. Machiavelli understood that on the chessboard of life, those who give themselves away too quickly lose before they begin. Politics guided by reality shows that true power lies not in revealing everything, but in hiding the right cards. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is to resist the temptation to expose oneself completely. Better to be feared than loved also applies here, because those who maintain secrecy create respect, while those who open up too much generate disdain. People who reveal every secret, every weakness, every fear, believe they are building intimacy, but they are only providing ammunition to be used against them. It is naive to confuse transparency with wisdom. The strategist knows that some truths should be guarded like jewels, not shared like cheap currency. In practice, here's how it works. A man who declares himself excessively, who tells everything about his life, his insecurities, his plans, ends up becoming predictable. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean being an open book. It means managing exposure precisely. The calculated use of force in this field lies in knowing what to show and what to hide. Think of leaders who, even surrounded by people, never fully reveal their intentions. This opacity protects them. A woman who believes she has you completely figured out loses interest because there's no longer any mystery. A woman who feels she never has you completely, even in moments of closeness, keeps the tension burning. This is the power of not giving in, turning curiosity into an invisible leash. Want to apply it in practice? Start by reducing over-explanations. If someone questions your silence, don't rush to justify it. Let the doubt speak louder. In relationships, don't reveal every detail of your routine. Cultivate gaps that spark interest. In business, don't reveal your entire strategy. Deliver just enough to be respected. Virtù and fortuna belong to those who understand that total intimacy is a fantasy, and that predictability is poison to authority. Constant adaptability means shaping how much you show yourself according to the scenario, never more than necessary. Those who master the art of not giving themselves away create space to control not only the narrative, but also the other person's affection. And it is precisely in controlling affection that the next key to power lies, the control of affection. Machiavelli once said that governing isn't just about commanding bodies, but also hearts. Politics guided by reality shows that affection, when mismanaged, turns strong men into docile servants. The end justifies the means. If it's necessary to manipulate feelings to maintain power, so be it. Better to be feared than loved fits perfectly here because love blinds, but fear keeps you alert. The fatal error lies in believing that giving unlimited affection generates reciprocity. In practice, it breeds complacency. Those who give affection without measure are drained, exploited, and discarded. It's hard to admit, but uncontrolled affection becomes weakness. A man who masters his own heart is respected. A man who gives it without filters becomes a hostage. See clear examples. Politicians make promises of collective affection, equality, justice, prosperity, but never fully deliver, knowing that scarcity keeps people hungry and obedient. Relationships work the same way. A woman who feels she already possesses all their affection tends to lose respect. One who perceives limits, boundaries, and self-control remains tense. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean loving excessively, but giving enough to maintain bonds without relinquishing dominance. The calculated use of force in this context lies in balancing how much you give and how much you withhold. Those who don't understand this become victims of their own emotional generosity. In practice, effective control means being selective, paying attention consciously, not automatically, expressing affection without becoming predictable, offering closeness without sacrificing strategic distance. Virtue and fortune smile upon those who transform affection into a resource, not an addiction. A simple test. The next time you feel like sending a loving message, hold off for a few minutes. Notice how the weight increases its value. Or in conversations, don't always rush in with compliments. Let the absence of them build weight. Constant adaptability requires measuring not only your words, but also your gestures of affection. Because in the end, whoever controls affection controls the invisible battlefield. And this control is only complete with another lethal element, the timing of contradiction. The timing of contradiction. Contradiction, when used at the right time, is one of the most brutal weapons of power. Machiavelli understood that reality-driven politics doesn't require absolute coherence, but results. The end justifies the means, and this includes changing positions if the context demands it. Better to be feared than loved, but even better is to be unpredictable, because the unpredictable cannot be dominated. Those who never contradict themselves become decipherable, and the decipherable become easy prey. Those who know when to break the mold create a field of instability that disarms others. Think of leaders who yesterday showed tenderness and today show coldness. Oscillation is calculated, not the result of a lack of control. The doubt this generates is more powerful than any linear discourse. Want to see it in practice? A woman accustomed to receiving daily messages of affection collapses when suddenly that flow is interrupted. Not because she's been abandoned, but because the contrast creates panic. The calculated use of force in this field lies in choosing the exact moment to defy expectations. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean being predictable. It means knowing when to contradict to rebalance the scales. It's like an investor. If they always buy or sell at the same times, the market swallows their strategy. But those who defy the obvious, who act unexpectedly, gain an advantage. Contradiction isn't a flaw, it's a tool. Virtue and fortune favor those who master the time of contradiction. It's not about being inconsistent, but about using inconsistency as a mask of power. A historical example. Caesar could be ruthless in one battle and merciful in the next, not because he was unstable, but because this strategic contradiction confused allies and enemies. In relationships, the same principle applies: showing affection and then withdrawing it, offering attention and then refusing. This dance creates dependence. Constant adaptability requires breaking routines when they begin to create predictability. Those who understand this maintain control. And it is at this point that the final piece emerges: calculated distance, the space that transforms absence into amplified presence. The power of calculated distance Machiavelli already knew. Too much proximity breeds contempt, too much distance breeds oblivion. Politics guided by reality demands balance, and that's where calculated distance comes in. The end justifies the means, and if maintaining distance is necessary to maintain respect, then so be it. Better to be feared than loved also means better to be remembered intensely than trivialized by routine. The man who is always available loses value. The one who disappears completely loses relevance. The secret is to be close enough to be desired, but far enough away to be uncontrolled. Planned absence increases the price of presence. This is how kings kept their subjects reverent, not by coexistence, but by the rarity of their appearance. Want a practical example? In a relationship, someone who always responds immediately becomes predictable, almost disposable. Meanwhile, someone who can disappear for hours, days, or even weeks without justifying or apologizing creates an invisible tension that fuels the other person's imagination. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean always being around. It means maintaining the mystery that sustains curiosity. The calculated use of force here isn't physical but symbolic, showing that you're not possession, not routine, not guaranteed. The scarcity of presence transforms every appearance into an event. Distance is the weapon of those who know that desire dies in abundance and grows in emptiness. In political practice, the same thing happens. Leaders who expose themselves too much lose their aura of authority, while those who emerge only at strategic moments maintain respect. Virtue and fortune belong to those who master this math. Power isn't just in what you do, but in how much you're absent. Constant adaptability means understanding when it's time to step aside, so your return has an impact. Think of musicians who add years and return to sellout stadiums, of leaders who remain silent and then utter a single phrase that changes the course of history. The power of calculated distance is to transform absence into multiplied presence. And now that you've seen how each piece of this game fits together, it's time to understand the brutality that weaves it all together in the title that brought us here. Now that you've seen the raw anatomy of power according to Machiavelli, the question remains: what will you do with it? Will you continue living as a hostage to validation, begging for affection and handing over your weaknesses on a silver platter? Or will you use every word as a scalpel to cut away what makes you manipulable? Look at yourself and answer, how many times have you kept quiet for fear of being replaced? How many times have you opened your heart thinking you'd earn respect, but only given yourself ammunition? How long will you let emotion override reason while others play the game of silence and distance? The answer isn't in changing the world, but in changing your attitude. If this shock has torn you apart, then it's time to apply it. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Start testing. Talk less than you'd like, offer less affection than expected, disappear when it's predictable. Power isn't asked for, it's taken. And if you want to continue learning how, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Because here, the truth doesn't console, it liberates and it hurts.